Welcome to Edison Open Forum Cannabinoids 2021. My name's Vivienne Parry. Now, legalization, increasing acceptance and demand for both pharmaceutical and consumer products mean the cannabinoid industry is booming. By 2026, the global market is estimated to be worth $60 billion, but biosynthesis could take it to new heights. Edison Open Forum asks the brightest minds in CBD what they think the impact of biosynthesis will be and what's next for their sector. With me is Kevin Chen, founder and CEO of Hyasynth. Kevin, hello.
Hi, Vivienne.
So this is a fantastically interesting company at the very start of biosynthesis in this area. Tell me how Hyasynth came to be and what its mission and purpose is.
Definitely. We were one of the first companies to get started in the biosynthesis of cannabinoids, like the field as a whole. The company was founded back in 2014, and really the original inspiration came from a lot of know-how around engineering yeast to produce different kinds of chemicals. So myself and my co-founders have done other genetic engineering projects that were related to, okay, like how can we make a yeast that produces plastic precursors so that we're relying less on petrochemical industry and have a more environmentally friendly way of producing these things. So of course, when we looked at the cannabinoid industry, we saw similar kinds of challenges in terms of the amount of resources consumption that are tied to cannabis production. And then of course, looking at fermentation as a way that we can produce these things more easily. But I think the original inspiration for me personally is coming from, my background in biochemistry, where you look at the endocannabinoid system as a part of, human health, as part of your body. And it touches on so many aspects of both like your mental health, your skin health, your gastrointestinal health. Like there's so many things that are tied to this one system.
And there are endocannabinoid receptors scattered throughout your body, aren't there? Because people think that they're only in your brain, but actually they're throughout your body.
Yeah, they're everywhere, and it's amazing. Like you see, clinical trials happening for like epilepsy stuff, as well as like PTSD stuff, as well as like glaucoma stuff. All these things they're all tied together. And so, one of the big frustrations that I had coming into this industry was that, okay, we have cannabis legalization here in Canada, like on the horizon, right? And a lot of doctors aren't really sure like how to work with it. Where like, basically they'll give out medical cannabis prescriptions, but they can't really tell a patient like, oh, you should take this much of this thing or that much of that thing. The patient has to kind of figure it out for themselves, like, okay, what do I do? And everybody's confused about how do we use the endocannabinoid system as a tool for improving human health, or as a tool chest, or as a platform where, it's there, it exists, and there's so many ways that we can use it to improve human health in so many different conditions. And what I'm trying to figure out is how do we make those tools more available? How do we really get to the full potential of the endocannabinoid system? And right now, with cannabis production being the primary source of these things, there's really no way to access the full potential of the endocannabinoid system. And that's both from a perspective of, how do we produce more, CBD in higher quality, as well as how do we access the full spectrum of cannabinoids? How do we dose it precisely? How do we, bring more pharmaceutical products to the market, or how do we bring more consumer products to the market in a way that's reliable and safe that consumers can trust and really depend on, right? And right now,
that reliability is a big issue, isn't it? Because standardization is very hard to do, because you've got a plant material, so you can have 6 plants growing in exactly the same plot, and each of them will have different quantities of the various cannabinoids in, and that's obviously no good if either you're a pharmaceutical company wanting to develop the use of a new cannabinoid, or indeed perhaps actually just in general use, because we're seeing it used more and more in consumer products as well. So, and the quantities can be highly variable from year to year. So biosynthesis seems like something whose idea was coming for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could point to biosynthesis as a platform for production of antibiotics is one of the oldest examples, right? Like, penicillin is a fungi that produced that, back in the early 1900s that this was like figured out. And a more recent example is with insulin production, where of course insulin used to come from pigs and now it comes from bacteria. And with cannabinoids, we're heading the same direction, where we have right now what is a crude and resource intensive supply, and we're going to migrate over to one that is reliable and efficient, which is industrial fermentation.
And of course, you can scale very rapidly. So tell me, what are the advantages of scaling in this industry? What will it allow you to do, or the whole sector to do?
Yeah. So the way that we would scale with fermentation is that you're just looking for bigger tanks to do the production in. And right now, a lot of these bigger tanks in these facilities that do fermentation already exist. So your fermentation is already used, like I said, for producing antibiotics, producing a number of different pharmaceutical ingredients, also for producing things like vitamin C and citric acid. It's really a platform for so many different industries. And now we're enabling that platform to be used for cannabinoids. So we can start to imagine like how much more reliable and how much more scalable the production system becomes. What that enables is for us to, reduce the environmental impact of producing these key healthcare ingredients for people, where we can use 200 times less water, 10 times less land, produce this stuff 20 times faster than cultivation of cannabis. It's really not good for the environment to continue building more of these greenhouses or indoor facilities for production of this stuff. And what this enables for companies is, of course, environmental benefit, but also to have something reliable that can build upon for larger scale products, where what your price is going to be for the next 5 years, let's say, and that the quality is always going to be there for you, and that the scale of what you're demanding, what you want to grow there, is always going to be there. You don't have to worry that much about procurement anymore. But also there's a flexibility element to it as well, where we produce like CBD as an ingredient, for example. That's one of our main production lines. And that can be used in many different formats and formulations, but also we look beyond just CBD and into the more rare cannabinoids, which are even harder to access by cannabis cultivation. And so ultimately we want to see businesses coming to us saying like, hey, I want to order like 1 kilogram of CBD, and we'll provide that at like the highest quality possible and have that be super reliable and cost effective. And also, if they wanted to have a custom formulation of like, hey, I want this much CBD and this much CBDV or THCV or something more rare, then that's something else that we can also provide, right? And so really, that's what's we're enabling this industry to do. It's like source these cannabinoids, source any of them, and have that be super reliable, super scalable, where there's no more questions about like, oh, but maybe this farmer is doing well this year and maybe not next year, or you have to source from multiple farmers. Like this is all crazy stuff that like right now is a headache for all the cannabis companies. It's crazy how much work they have to go into everything that's involved in cultivation of cannabis, and we're just going to remove all of that burden.
So as you've hinted at, biosynthesis is a very, very well established platform for all sorts of medicines and other products. So how are you using the latest advances in biosynthesis to your advantage? I mean, I presume that you don't have quite the R&D problems that maybe some other areas might have, because it's all there.
Yeah, on the R&D front, I would say, we have a huge advantage by being one of the first companies to really focus on this area, where we've been able to spend all the time to build out an R&D team and like a really good platform for, creating hundreds of new strains of yeast every week, for really knowing what to change in a yeast strain or in a process to help improve our yields. And that's all like within like our in-house team. And it's huge to have that in-house because like I think on one hand, it helps with regulatory questions, but also it's part of our assets overall. It's this like really great yeast engineering platform. In terms of like latest advances in biosynthesis and how we integrate those into our platform, of course we have everything from like sophisticated gene editing techniques to computational modeling that's going to help predict like how do we improve our yields, as well as like fermentation process development, where it's about like how do we find the best ingredient combinations that are going to get our yeast to produce as much cannabinoids as possible. One of the most unique things that I say we've done is that we've invented new genes, new enzymes that we integrate into our yeast strains. which enable us to increase our yields of cannabinoids. And those new genes that we've noted, some of them are originating from cannabis, but some of them actually are not, where we've actually found a gene from a slime mold that massively improves the efficiency of cannabinoid production. And it's sort of funny that you it's two completely different worlds, right? Slime molds and like cannabis. Like, how did this come together? And practically speaking, this is the latest, in terms of biosynthesis technologies. Like, how do you find the right, genetic parts to build the ultimate production system? And that's really what we're all about.
So on the one hand, you've got something that ticks all the ESG boxes, but on the other hand, there's an element of genetic modification here, which for those that are into that kind of natural vibe is something that may not go down so well. Is that going to be an issue, do you think?
Not at all. I think when it comes to the natural vibe of things, I completely agree with there's stuff in nature that's really important to be there, right? And when it comes time to source those things from nature, that's great. But there's always a time where we have to move away from just relying on the natural source. And I'll use an example of one of some good friends of mine over at a company called Perfect Day Foods, where they are all about production of dairy ingredients using yeast as opposed to growing, cultivation of animals and cows. And we all know how unethical and how detrimental it is to the environment to have a dairy industry that is so industrially oriented. So, their question is how do we improve that? And of course, they use genetic modification, they use fermentation like we do. And it's the same sort of mentality where, yes, there's nature there, that's good, but now we can work with something that's better. And for the sake of the planet, we have to. If you want to access this full healthcare portfolio of things.
So there you are, Edison viewers. You've heard it here first. You can have yeast milk for your latte the next time. But what are the risks, do you think, of this business model?
A lot of the risks used to be in the technology front.
Because it doesn't always, people think, it's tech. But, just in the same way that cannabis is, prey to different seasons and weathers and all those kind of things, yeasts are tender biological things that sometimes don't do what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. And that's, again, a 7-year head start helps a lot here. Where we back when we started, there was nothing. Nobody had done any work to show that this is even possible, right? But we were able to, assemble the right team, raise the right amount of funding to develop those first strains of yeast that were producing THC and CBD and everything. And now we're at the stage where a lot of that technical risk is behind us. And now we're looking at, okay, how do we commercialize? How do we get, the most amount of demand for our particular product? How do we find the right partners who are looking to work with us and bring our CBD as an ingredient, to the market ultimately?
Is there a big capital expenditure in the kind of plant that you require? I mean, not obviously plants, but your machinery that, your vats and all those kind of things that you need to have. Or is there a thriving business in things that have been used for other purposes, as you were suggesting?
Yeah, it's more the latter, where there are businesses that exist today that do a lot of this type of fermentation work, and that do it on a contract basis. So for us to go to market initially, we are not looking to invest, particularly heavily into a big facility or build a massive greenhouse or any kind of crazy indoor facility like we saw in the past few years. Now we have an opportunity to use a model where we outsource our manufacturing. And that's going to make us a lot more cost effective in those earlier days. And then we can choose, where and when it makes the most sense to build our own facility at a later time.
I'm absolutely fascinated, Kevin, to know what you think the future of this sector is, because it seems to me that there's a bit of a bubble going on in terms of CBD being in everything, dog biscuits, shampoo, whatever. That surely must dissipate after a while. But what's the long-term future here?
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of things happening right now. I think some of the bubbliness will go away. There'll be some ideas which will just not fly, right? But there's going to be a whole pile of stuff that is extremely legitimate and that is on its way. And I'm always inspired every year by the researchers that are doing studies in the cannabinoid field, because they're building that future where it's clearly there's a link here and there's an opportunity here for new product development. In terms of the future of this industry, I think there's going to be, there will be cannabinoids in a lot of different things. Not everything, but like a lot of, cosmetic types of ingredients, a lot of food and beverage type stuff. There'll be CBD in that. I think, one of the interesting futures that I like to think about is like how much do cannabinoids play in comparison to like beverage alcohol, for example, as options for like recreational use. That's something that is like a big question here in Canada as well, where like, cannabis is available as a legal like adult use substance. And on the human healthcare front, I think every patient anywhere in the world, doesn't matter like how much money you have, what age you are, whatever, should be able to get access to, this healthcare option, where if there's benefit here and it's a safe ingredient to use and it's going to help you, then you should be able to get access to that. And right now, and whether it's regulatory or quality or just having to deal with cannabis plants, that makes it difficult to do that. That's going to ultimately go away, and we're going to help enable that.
One of the things we've spoken about in this series before is the advantage that Canada has, because I guess one of the biggest hurdles and challenges here is overcoming the stigma about cannabis. So not whether it's legal or not, but actually a stigma against even thinking about it as a potential medical product.
Yeah. In Canada, I mean, there's still a lot of stigma around here. I would say, like, despite, the energy going towards legalization, it's still, a perspective thing that's on its way to coming around. And that'll, like, over time, that'll change, of course. But I think, when we start to think about cannabinoids as like, yes, maybe they originated from cannabis, the same as how like opioids, let's say, originated from like poppies, like we eventually started to use those more effectively as pharmaceutical ingredients. It's not really a question of like, drug addiction kind of stuff, taboos around that. But that's a key thing that we do bring to the table, like as a company, right? Where when we do business with a new company or a brand that wants to enter the space, we can safely say that we've never handled cannabis in our process. There's no cannabis plant involved, and it's just a yeast fermentation process, the same way how they source a lot of other yeast fermentation ingredients. And of course, you can guarantee, can't you, that there's no THC in Absolutely.
what you produce, and that's a big issue, particularly for the big brands wanting to use CBD in their products.
Yeah, definitely. Issue for, big brands and also regulators, but yes.
Yes, regulators are kind of interested in it. So Kevin, to conclude, can you outline your current investment case for potential buyers of your stock?
So we're currently a privately owned company here in Canada. To date, we've raised over $10 million of investment, and that's coming from both SOS Ventures, which is one of the largest life sciences investors in the world, one of the most sophisticated technical investors here, as well as strategic investment from Organigram, which is one of the biggest Canadian cannabis growers. So that recently did a deal with BAT to have an investment and R&D going on with them. So we're happy with having really massive investors and really important people around us to help support the company as we grow. And now we're looking to raise a new funding round that's really geared towards commercialization of the technology. Like I said earlier, like technical risk, like that's behind us now. We're all about getting our product to market and seeing that value inflection point from bringing our first commercial products to market and establishing our first partnerships in this industry. So we're ultimately looking for new investors that can help us along that journey, as well as new strategic partners that could also want to source ingredients from us or want to work with us in order to improve their environmental impact or bring new products to market.
Kevin Chen, thank you so much, and I wish Hyasynth and you the very best of luck as you begin this journey. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.